We all like a bit of background blur, don't we? It helps isolate our subject up. The problem is that there's sometimes where you want a lot of background blur. The problem is, generally to get these, you use lenses that have long focal lengths and fast apertures. That's why portrait photographers quite often will use 85 primes or 100mm or 135 primes because they give you really shallow depths of field. But the problem is that these lenses can be quite pricey. And maybe you're somebody who can't justify spending that much money on a lens, but you really want that kind of out of focus background. Well, in this video, I want to show you a couple of hacks and techniques as to how you can get really out of focus backgrounds in your images like you would get with those fast telephoto lenses using this. This is a Canon 60D fitted with a Sigma 18 to 250mm super zoom. Now this has an aperture of f3.5 to 6.3. So a lens like this isn't very good at getting really out of focus backgrounds, normally. Now you can artificially create more background blur in Photoshop using things like the lens blur filter. The problem with this is that it never produces a truly natural look because it adds a uniform amount of blur across your scene. And yet realistically, the amount of blur that you get in your shot will vary depending how far away the particular out of focus subject is from your camera and where your camera is focusing. If you take my computer, for example, okay, they're blue LED lights inside the computer case, but they appear more like orbs because they're slightly out of focus. Now, if I bring the focal plane in towards the camera, you can see that they get bigger and bigger the further away from the point of focus that they are. And as they get closer and closer to the point of focus, they get smaller and smaller. Where this presents a problem with adding blur in post is that software really doesn't know how far away things are from the camera. Now, this might not be that noticeable if you've already got some blur in your background and you're adding a little bit more. The difference won't be that noticeable to you. But if you go to the extremes and add a lot of blur, then you are going to see a difference. The other problem you have is that a lens blur filter will just blur an entire subject out and it will make it physically take up more space within the frame. Now that's not actually that much of a problem for your background, but it is a problem for your subject. Because if you just take a single picture with your subject in there and then add blur in post, it's also going to blur your subject. Now the workaround for that is you duplicate the layer. So you have one layer that is as it was, and you have one layer that you add the blur to, and then you layer mask the two over. The problem with that, however, is when you blur up your background layer, your subject's in there as well, and they are going to get blurred out and take up more room than they originally did. So when you then make that your background layer, you're going to have a halo, if you like, of the partially blurred outline of your subject appearing around the in-focus, sharp version of your subject. And if you rub out that extra haloing, you're going to end up with the in-focus background seeping through behind your subject. So it's still going to look fake. And that's generally the two pitfalls that I see people fall into when they're faking blur in their images. They either have weird outlines around the subject so you can tell it's artificial, or it's uniformed and there's no depth to their image, it looks completely flat. So the workaround for this is to actually take two images. So here we have a camera. There we have a tripod. So what I'm going to do is take one normal shot. Now I'm going to take another shot of just the background without me in it. But before I do that, I'm going to do two important things. The first thing I'm going to do is switch the lens into manual focus. I'm going to do that because when I then try and take the next shot, if it's in autofocus, it's going to focus on the background, and that's actually going to have the completely wrong effect of what I want. The second thing I'm going to do is actually defocus the lens slightly. Defocusing the lens is exactly what your camera would do if you moved your subject closer to the camera in the first place. All we're doing is just not having the subject in there for the camera to focus on. So I'm now going to move out the way and take another shot of just the background. And now what I'm going to do is put them both into Photoshop and show you how to merge them together. Nice and straightforward. All you're going to do is just load the two layers onto a single file in Photoshop or whatever piece of software you're using. then all I do is simply put the background layer as the top layer, drop the opacity down so I can see the outline of me in the frame, and then I just rub out the parts of the background layer that I'm in. You can obviously do it in whatever way you want, that's just the technique that I use. So, that's the portrait side of things covered. But like I said, you might also want really blurred backgrounds for things like product photos and stuff. You know, where you've got like a picture of a product and you want lots of big bokeh balls in the background just to make it all look nice and pretty. Usually they're done with lights like way off in the distance, like, you know, fairy lights or spot lamps or something, but they have to be quite a way away from your subject and away from the camera in order to get them to render as big bokeh balls rather than the actual lights that they are. And that might present you a problem, which I've encountered many a times, of not having enough physical space to work with. That if you want to fill the frame with lights, the further away that they are from the camera, the more space that they then have to take up. Because obviously your field of view expands, so the further from your camera you get, the more room that you have to play with. Now let's say, for example, I wanted to take a product photo of this lens, and I wanted, you know, a background full of bokeh balls. I would have to get the lens very close to the camera and have the lights a long way away in order to do that. And obviously, the lights would have to take up a lot of space. Now, I did actually post a picture on my Instagram of this lens a few months ago in a similar sort of setup. And for that shot, I used a Christmas tree. So, how to hack that one using this? The first thing you need to do is take a photo of what you want your bokeh background to be. So for this, I have a little LED light panel that I'm going to use. So for this now, I'm at 35mm-ish and f4.5. That'll do. And we take a picture. Now comes the cheating part, because what you're going to do is load that image up onto a screen. Doesn't matter whether it's a desktop computer, a laptop computer, doesn't matter whether you shoot it in JPEG and load it onto a TV screen. Just any display that you can load the image onto. And we'll make that full screen. There we are. Stylish. Once you've got a background image in place, you just need to put the product in front of the screen. Now, obviously, because the screen's a bit jacked up here, I'm going to stack it on a box just to get it at the right height, but you can put it just on your keyboard or whatever. And put a bit of light on there, and now... So there you go, proof that you can get really out of focus backgrounds by using a really out of focus lens. These are not going to replicate and rival the results you would get from using lenses designed for such purposes, but it is a much cheaper option if you are somebody who cannot justify spending that much money on a lens. So that's it for this video, guys. As always, if you have any questions or queries, comment box is down below. Thank you so much for stopping by, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.